What's up, everyone? Breaking news. Apparently, Puka Nacua is in rehab, not injury rehabilitation. Nope, the other one, unfortunately. We're going to talk about this in the show. Well, not perfect timing, because that's not a good thing. Interesting timing. Interesting timing, because today's topic is wide receiver rankings and tight end rankings. This is part 2 of our rankings. Last week, we intended to do all of them. We only got through quarterbacks and running backs because, well, there was a lot to cover, and wide receivers and tight ends. I didn't want to rush them through, so I decided to make their own dedicated live show here. And of course, if you guys have any questions, because this is a live show, welcome into the Dear Miss Fantasy podcast. Obviously, I didn't do my typical intro there because the Puka Nacua information literally came out like 15 minutes before I started going live here, and it is April 1st. So I did contemplate for a second, is this April Fool's? But after a series of tweets and statements from his representation, I was like, okay, yeah, let's talk about it. This seems pretty credible here, unfortunately. So we'll go ahead and dive right into that. I'll pull up the wide receiver rankings. But again, of course, live show, everybody. Thank you for joining in. It is Wednesday. I mentioned this. It's Wednesday, April 1st. So April Fools. My kids already got over on me multiple times today. It was quite miserable here. So don't play any jokes on me. I've had enough today. I've had enough of the jokes here. If we have time, I'll tell you the jokes they played on me, because they were pretty good, pretty dramatic. And they really sold me on it. But yeah, we'll go ahead and dive in. And of course, yeah, we're talking wide receivers and tight ends. But if you missed the show last week and there's anybody else that you want to talk about, of course, ask any questions. And if you need to see any other rankings or anything, feel free to make a request. But I'm going to pull up here and remove my banner, of course, as I always forget. I'm going to go ahead and pull up here my rankings for wide receivers. Puka Nacua sitting right there at the top. And for those of you listening on the podcast, not watching live, if you want to see the wide receiver rankings, these are wide receiver rankings through Fantasy Pros. So you can go into there to see my full list of rankings. I've got a link as well, like in my bio, that shows how to directly access those as well if you want to see the entire list. Because this pretty picture is just the top 24. Obviously, we will dive into far more than that, but we'll start off right here at the top with Puka Nacua. My goodness. Puka Nacua, unfortunately, has been he's been going through it in terms of behavioral issues, I think is the best way to describe it. But this is very big. This is very big timing here, because we've got a lot of stuff that is going on specifically with the Rams, right? Because we know that the Rams were shopping around Davante Adams. This is not a mystery now. And it does make sense, right? Because it would not be the first time that they shopped around a veteran wide receiver who had coincidentally had some, hamstring injuries. It feels kind of familiar with Cooper Kupp there. Very Cooper Kupp-ish, right? So we know that the Rams were shopping around Davante Adams. And considering that he did battle a hamstring injury, which is obviously a telltale sign for us that an older wide receiver is unfortunately teetering on the edge of inconsistency and regression, unfortunately. He looked now, Davante was excellent last year before the hamstring injury. And you could argue that obviously the Rams were playing from a excellent position, right? They were not fighting for battling. Oh my God, we're just trying to scrape through. And they can get by without Davante. They can win games and get by without Davante Adams. Obviously, you have Puka Nacua. You have excellent running backs. You've got Matt Stafford and a bevy of tight ends who could fill in as well. So you could argue that perhaps if they were in a dire situation, maybe Davante Adams' hamstring injury was not as big of an issue. But at the end of the day, that is always something that we have to look at and say, especially when it's the first time that it pops up, right? For a receiver of Davante's age. He looked fantastic, and we know that last season was fantastic for us because we know that the Rams offense and Matt Stafford, who ironically also was dealing with an injury heading into the season, the back injury that we had 10,000 question marks around. I think he had gotten an epidural right before the season. We were like, is he even going to be healthy to start the season? Can he make it through the season? We know that if Matt Stafford is on the field, this offense can support two elite high-end wide receivers. And I feel like that's underselling it. I wanted to say something other than elite because the amount of volume and touchdowns that he can push to receivers is so incredible that, we had concerns that the addition of Davante Adams would have some kind of impact on Puka. And it did have an impact from a touchdown perspective because Matt Stafford was locked into Davante Adams in the red zone. I mean, the targets were egregious while he was healthy. At one point before his injury, I believe he was leading the league in terms of red zone targets, and it wasn't even close. The hyper targeting was insane. But despite all of that, Puka Nacua was still putting up just above numbers above everybody else, right? So when we look at this offense, we got a very clear picture of what this offense will and can continue to look like in the future if they were to move on from Davante Adams to another receiver. Now we have Puka Nacua, their wide receiver one, their young wide receiver of the future, dealing with these off the field issues. And the Rams are now coming up on the NFL draft, where they coincidentally, courtesy of James Pierce and the Falcons, have pick number 13. And I've looked at a wide variety of mock drafts. And at pick number 13, you should be able to get one of the top 3 receivers of your choice, right? So, I mean, when we're looking at mock drafts, at least one of them will be gone by then, arguably maybe a second, but at the very least, a third is going to be there. Now, the order obviously is debatable. If you look at any mock draft, it can be anywhere from Jordan Tyson or Carnell Tate to Jordan Tyson to Mekhi Lemon. So obviously there's a lot of interchangeability, and there are different receivers in terms of build and capabilities, right? All wide receiver ones, but in terms of building capabilities, you could arguably draft a different one according to what fits your team better, right? So it'll be very interesting to see. I've got I'm going to do a video later in the month before the draft, kind of pinpointing some of those ideal landing spots for those top receivers and some other guys as well. But looking at this Puka Nacua situation, reality is that now we're in a situation where we're looking at pick 13 and wondering, if the Rams take a wide receiver there, my God, would that wide receiver immediately shoot up draft boards to an absolutely insane position. So this is one that is going to be potentially massive impact for us. Now, obviously, they could not do it. And then we also know that the Rams scouting department is impeccable. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a round 1 receiver. It can be 2, 3, 4. We have seen, obviously, that they can flip a mid-round receiver into an elite option. And they're very skilled at identifying those players that have that level of potential. So this is something to pay attention to for sure. It doesn't even have to be round 1, guys. It could be our little diamond in the rough. Next Puka Nacua could be right on the horizon there. But immediate reaction in terms of the rankings, Puka Nacua, obviously our wide receiver 1 there, pretty much uncontested. There's no way that we can remove Puka from being the wide receiver 1, because if he's on the field, right, it's Puka Nacua. And the fact that, again, that we saw him put up that level of production with Davante Adams putting up the level of production that he did, I mean, there's no flaw. There's no scenario in which you would not trust him to be the overall wide receiver 1. But perhaps maybe this information that we've had, and we've obviously seen a wide variety of behavioral question marks over the past year or so, perhaps it does make you say, hey, if I've got the first overall pick, maybe I just teeter and go ahead and say I'm taking Bijan Robinson and playing it safe, especially with Tyler Algier gone. Hopefully, cross our fingers, we can get some more of those goal line touches. The amount of goal line touches that Tyler Algier had last season was insane. I actually just posted a video 2 days ago to my YouTube channel talking about Zach Robinson as the offensive coordinator in Tampa Bay and Bucky Irving, and the potential issue of him being maybe a little bit too, maybe us need to, approaching him with a little bit more caution because he might be overdrafted. We've got the addition of Kenneth Gainwell from a receiving back perspective. He is one of the better receiving backs in the league. Then we have Sean Tucker that was retained there. And obviously we saw the goal line sniping last season of Sean Tucker. And coincidentally, the new offensive coordinator for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is Zach Robinson, who was the person who was in charge of all of those Tyler Algier touchdowns that sniped us on Bijan Robinson. Sorry, roundabout way. If you guys haven't noticed, I am a wee bit, no, I'm probably not a wee bit, I'm quite ADD. So sometimes we go in roundabout directions there. But all that was to say that we've got the vacated touchdowns of Tyler Algier there in Atlanta. So perhaps it makes Bijan the safer option there over Puka Nacua. We'll talk it out and we'll debate it, but this will be pretty critical for us to follow this offseason, especially as we close in here on the draft. And presumably, even if we didn't have the Puka Nacua information and drama right now, even if we didn't have that, the fact that we know that Davante Adams was being shopped around, and that we know that technically speaking, like we've seen, because Davante Adams was injured, and also Puka Nacua had, what was it, like a concussion at some point, right, throughout the season. So we've seen this offense where one of the other receivers had to step up, and not a single one of them really consistently. Like there was some, like there's some guys down there that can, obviously provide some supplemental support, but none of them looked like they're capable of ascending into either Puka Nacua or Davante Adams' role. So with the shopping around of Davante Adams probably being the more pressing thing there in terms of the Rams offense, it does lead us to believe that there is a strong possibility that they will be taking a wide receiver at some point in this draft. And that wide receiver would definitely be a massive, massive potential fantasy impact for us. So yes, that was the big Puka Nacua drama there. Check in the comments here as we go on here. Let's see here. Henry Odom. I can't understand why Lamb is a first-round pick with. Whoa, yeah, that's a good point, Henry. I'm not gonna lie there. Let me finish the comment for the people who can't see the video. Henry Odom says, I can't understand why Lamb is a first-round pick with Pickens. Please help me understand the logic. Thanks. I don't disagree with you on that one, right? When we're looking at CeeDee Lamb, we're looking extremely optimistically in terms of his production. Obviously, the upside was severely capped with how talented and the production that George Pickens had. So I'm kind of right there with you. The problem is that arguably the issue that we get into, as we look at the rankings, and the reason that CeeDee Lamb gets that. And let me look at consensus real quick. Cause I don't, to my knowledge, I don't believe that I'm above consensus on CeeDee Lamb, but I will check just to double check and make sure I'm not crazy. Now, yeah, consensus wide receiver 4 as well. That is now reference point. He is 4 is the highest he will go. Nobody is ranking him above Puka, JSN or Jamar Chase. And the lowest ranking that he has in general is wide receiver 7. But again, the reasoning for that, and I hate that, and this is kind of why we might perhaps from a draft strategy perspective, once you get past JSN, perhaps the safer route is to start tilting towards those running backs, right? Because the problem with why CeeDee Lamb is getting that courtesy wide receiver 4 ranking is that arguably you could place Amon-Ra ahead of him. Amon-Ra is incredibly steady. He does not have the same ceiling as CeeDee Lamb. So I suspect that maybe we would get those two flipped if we do get to draft season and George Pickens is confirmed to still be with the team, right? And we know what we're getting heading into the season. I could see those two flip, but Pickens is only, Amon-Ra St. Brown is arguably the only one that you could flip with CD. The problem is that, again, after that, you've got Justin Jefferson with a quarterback issue. Yeah, we've got Kyler Murray. Yay, right? Yay-ish. Yay for our dynasty teams. Thank God. Right? But from a fantasy perspective, yeah, I trust him for sure more than JJ McCarthy. I know that for a fact. But at the same time, how much do I trust him? Yeah, I don't know if I trust him to the point where I'm like, oh, for sure. Like, I'm all in on Justin Jefferson. We still have to have some apprehension here, right? After that, I have Chris Olave. I am higher on Chris Olave for sure. I'm 4 spots higher. We'll talk about that in a little bit here on Chris Olave. From that perspective, I just love what I saw at the end of the season with him and Tyler Shuck there. And that could adjust depending on where they take a receiver. They will be taking a receiver in the draft. If they do draft a receiver with their first round pick, then I will move him back in the rankings. But if we get a day 2 pick, I'm still full guns blazing on Chris Olave. Pure talent. It's his time, people. But after that, we get to guys like, and I'm lower on Drake London, so let me read these off real quick. So from my perspective, the top 10 that I have is Puka, Jamar Chase, JSN, CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Justin Jefferson, Chris Olave, Nico Collins, Drake London, Rashee Rice. receiver. God, we have so many problematic receivers. Consensus ranking for the top 10 is Puka, Jamar, JSN, okay, standard, CD, standard, Amon-Ra, Justin Jefferson, Drake London, Malik Neighbors, Nico Collins, George Pickens. So my problem with why CeeDee Lamb is sitting right there is that, again, we've got Justin Jefferson with a quarterback issue. We've then got a Drake London who unfortunately not only has a quarterback issue, but has the issue of a new coach whose offensive vision in Cleveland was consistently extremely heavy on tight ends. And mind you, that was, and you can argue, well, they didn't really have a wide receiver one. Well, he had Amari Cooper at one point, right? And that was the older version of Amari Cooper for sure, but still a very talented Amari Cooper that was like 28, 29-ish at that time period. And he still had heavy usage of tight ends in terms of total target share. So for a guy that we know loves to send one of the highest target share rates to tight ends, and now he is going to Kyle Pitts, I got a hard time believing that he is not going to be hyper targeting Kyle Pitts. And obviously we'll talk through tight end rankings, like spoiler alert. He is the thumbnail. I do like Kyle Pitts a lot this season because of that change with Kevin Stefanski, even though I have eternal beef with Kevin Stefanski that will never end. But unfortunately, when we're looking at the fact that we've got Bijan Robinson, and Kevin Stefanski has never been an issue for running backs, right? So we know that he will lean heavily on Bijan Robinson. We know that Bijan Robinson will be involved from a pass perspective. We know that we're probably going to get an upgrade in targets to Kyle Pitts. And we know that we have a shaky quarterback situation. Am I really comfortable with drafting Drake London over a guy like CeeDee Lamb? They're both in sketchy situations, but at least I know Dak can throw the ball. And I know what the coaching situation is, right? So that's why he would get that preference there. Then a guy like Malik Neighbors coming off of the injury, that could adjust depending on, how rehab goes. If he's available and active and running around during preseason, wheels up, no issue, right? But again, we have to be a little bit apprehensive because of the factor of him coming off of that injury. Also, we could be getting an additional, and probably are going to be getting an additional receiver there for Malik Neighbors as well. Nico Collins has a CJ Stroud issue, who has an offensive line issue. So unfortunately, CD is just probably one of the guys outside of Amon-Ra St. Brown that has the only stable situation in terms of quarterback being extremely well-known, volume being well-known, and you do at least know that, yeah, George Pickens is there, but at least I know there's a certain ceiling that exists with him, and there's the safety of a floor. So that's why he's at number 4 there. But I'm with you. At that point, I might be looking to some running backs rather than taking CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, and whatnot. Amon-Ra is the only one that I feel, again, super comfortable with just because the consistency has really been there for him. And I do trust the new offensive coordinator, Drew Petzing. So you're spot on to point that out for sure. Shout out in the chat to Easy E from Only Morale. Who is the quarterback for the Falcons? Ultimately, I do feel Penix will start the season, but I think the leash will be extremely short, and we would probably see Tua very quickly. I feel like they're two sides of the same coin. Oddly enough, we trust Tua to make it through a season more than Michael Penix. That feels weird to say, but we've zero proof that Michael Penix can make it through the season. At least we have seen, even post-concussion, we have seen Tua make it through a full season. So Penix is not trustworthy. He's not proven. I think they, it's a completely new regime, even in management as well. So while he is the QB1, I don't think there's a ton of loyalty there, unfortunately. So camp battle, probably if we could give the edge to Tua, yeah, but they might just go with the differential or the deference to existing QB1 status for Michael Penix. But either way, I would not be shocked if we see both of these guys throughout the season. So it's just such an unstable situation, right? From that fucking guy, I agree with your Puka take, but it looks like Chase has moved ahead of him in best ball drafts. I think that's reasonable, especially in best ball. You can definitely make that argument in best ball. Like in redraft, you have the additional issue of the unreliability of health from Joe Burrow, right? And the fact that when he is out of the offense, I mean, well, no, granted, they did retain Joe Flacco, right? I'm not crazy. They did retain Joe Flacco. So at least we've got that positive, a little bit of safety net there for sure, knowing that Joe has no problem. Joe, the Burrow, goes down, and Joe, the Flacco, would have zero problem keeping Jamar Chase afloat there. But I think, yeah, for sure in best ball, that makes a ton of sense. I would not be shocked if we see that shift in redraft as well, for sure. But again, it's just the trustworthiness of quarterbacks there. And I trust Matt Stafford more than I do Joe Burrow. So from Only Morale. So yeah, Tara, can you explain, would it matter who's the quarterback for the Falcons and how that would affect Drake London? And also, can you explain why you have Luther Burden over Rome Odunze? For sure. Yes. So when it comes to which quarterback matters and how it affects Drake London, I think in theory, actually, let's pull up. Can I quickly and easily look at the stats directly with Michael Penix and Drake London last season? Let's see. Let me double check on that. Yeah, I can make that comp real quick. Let's see. Penix was the starter through week 10 for the most part. There was like a little injury thing in week 3, but over 75% of snaps. So week 1 through 10, we had Michael Penix with Drake London. And over that time period, Penix wasn't awful. It was just the level of inconsistency. And as I look at the games that they had, you could argue that there were a few difficult defensive matchups in there, but at the end of the day, it wasn't that aggressive of a schedule that he should have struggled with. But we did have a lot of volatility from Drake London over that time period. He had games where without the touchdown, he had a maximum of 55 yards against Tampa Bay, Minnesota, and Carolina. Then he had a boom game against Washington, bad defense, boom game over 100 yards and a touchdown, boom game against Buffalo. Buffalo against the pass was pretty stout, so that's a good sign there. 150 yards and a touchdown. Subpar game against San Francisco, boom game against New England, and boom game against Indianapolis. I think I would rather lean towards Penix as being the safer option for Drake London because there's volatility. But the fact that you did at least provide boom games does make me feel a little bit more comfortable. What we saw with Tua at the end of the season with Miami was highly concerning. Not at the end of the season, but at the end of his tenure of being a starter was highly concerning. Obviously, when he's at his best, and offensive lines do play a part, but when he's at his best, we do see him, be able to supply plenty of volume to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. But when it's ugly, it's really ugly. And so at least with Michael Penix, the ugly, he can at least push volume. So I would say it does matter. I would like to see Michael Penix start off as the starting quarterback. And I think for continuity purposes, that is what's best for Drake London. So if we get that, we can feel a little bit more comfortable. But again, I think the leash would be extremely short. I do anticipate he'll start the season. But man, if Tua looks decent in preseason and Kevin Stefanski, Tua seems like a Kevin Stefanski kind of quarterback. Like if I had, based off what I know about Kevin Stefanski, if I had to line up quarterbacks and say Michael Penix or Tua Tagovailoa, I feel like he's going to teeter towards Tua Tagovailoa as his type of quarterback, just based off history, right? So yes, we care more about Michael Penix being the starter there and feeling more stable about that. Our only issue is that, just inconsistency, growth there, development, and the fact that he hasn't made it through a full season, unfortunately. And then the second part of that question, why Luther Burden over Rome Odunze? Target-wise and consistency, Burden's role in his alignment just makes it a little bit safer there for me. So he would be the guy that I would trust to have more volume, more consistency there. Rome Odunze in the role that he played, and perhaps this can adjust maybe with DJ Moore gone, because Moore obviously did play more of a varied role in the offense because he is a versatile receiver. So maybe they can open up some of that versatility to Odunze. who can be versatile. He just doesn't have to be used as a deep threat there. But I feel more comfortable with volume of Luther Burden, especially considering we did get just a little piece of Rome in Luther Burden there, where Burden did have his role elevated and was the better fantasy option over Burden there. I do have faith that Rome can bounce back. I feel like what we saw overall in terms of the inconsistency and underwhelming nature of Rome Odunze's production is not the same concern that I have like for Brian Thomas. Like that's someone that I would be very concerned about, right? I've got lingering concerns there. I don't have those same concerns for Rome Odunze there. So not a massive downgrade in terms of rankings for him compared to Burden, but I do trust Burden more for pure volume from a fantasy perspective. But Rome would have the higher ceiling, of course, but hey, highest ceiling might just belong to Colston Loveland at the end of the day. That's going to be a fun offense for sure. From Lindell Wells, 520-10. Top 6 are fine, but the rest is ludicrous. Let's trade number 10 Rice for, interesting here. So top 10, our top 6 are fine, but the rest are ludicrous. Let's trade number 10, Rashee Rice, for number 19, Terry McLaurin, or number 20, Ladd McConkey. The number 1 receiver is Travis Kelce until proven otherwise. No, like Kelce and Rashee Rice together, Rice outperformed him. In fact, the only reason if I could trust Rice to be competent off the field, Rice would be a easy top 10 pick for me. No question mark. I would be like draft, select all day, every day. The only thing that holds him back for me is not anything to do with on the field. He is the target leader there, and we've seen enough of them bump up together. And Travis Kelce, unfortunately, I'm glad he's returning. That's cool. But at the end of the day, he's got the age regression, unfortunately, and he's just not the same guy. Rashee Rice, when he's on the field, is incredible. I mean, I can let's look at Rice when he was on the field. I had the stats pulled out at one point in games that he was actually, it was just kind of ridiculous. In games where, like, when he came back, and granted, there were some kind of easier matchups there, right? But overall, he played weeks 7 through 15. And over that time period, he had the worst targets that he had was 7 against Buffalo. And Buffalo, obviously, that's very understandable, right? But between 7 and 12 targets, multiple games, 1, 2, 3, 4 games over that time period of double-digit targets there. He's the wide receiver 1 for sure. I would have him 10 times over Travis Kelce at this point. Rashee Rice, I would never flip him back that far to 19 or 20. If anything, if I could trust him to stay out of jail, it would be higher. But, we have to account for guys being off the field issues, unfortunately. With Terry McLaurin and Ladd McConkey, I'm optimistic. I love Terry McLaurin. I want to be optimistic. I think I do have him higher. I want to say I am actually higher than consensus on him. Let's see. I am. Yeah. So my ranking of Terry McLaurin, let me hide the comments super quick here just to make sure. No, you can see all the, no. Okay. I don't have to hide it. We can see all of them. I have Terry McLaurin at number 19. Consensus ranking for Terry McLaurin is wide receiver 22. So I am a little bit higher on him, actually. When it comes to Terry McLaurin, we know that they are going to have to add a wide receiver, factually. They're moving on from, I guess they could always dip back to Deebo Samuel, but knowing that they have on roster, like we've got the fodder of, potentially the Brandon Ayuk, connection there, and he could be signed. Okay. Brandon Ayuk honestly wouldn't scare me that much, but also Brandon Ayuk and Terry McLaurin is a little bit of a funky fit there. So I genuinely don't like that fit. I would anticipate them going to the draft and getting someone, even if they got Brandon Ayuk, no guarantee. Like this could be a Kenny Golladay situation, right? So I've got a lot of Kenny Golladay trauma. This could be a Kenny Golladay situation where the man is never productive ever again. So they have to draft a wide receiver. So somebody is going to be added there with Terry McLaurin. I am anticipating a bounce back season for Jaden Daniels. So in a perfect world, I would like Terry McLaurin to be a little bit higher. But based off of what we saw last season from Terry McLaurin and the fact that we know there's going to be an additional receiver there that will probably be an upgrade on Deebo Samuel, I can't move him up too much further. Definitely not as high as top 12. Ladd McConkey is an interesting one. I am right on consensus. Consensus has Ladd McConkey at 19. I've got him on 20. The difference there is I have him is because I have Terry McLaurin higher there. But when it comes to Ladd McConkey, the reason why we've moved him down significantly is that we already drafted him last season at like around the wide receiver 10, 12 range, and we overdrafted him. He was a round 2 pick, late round 2 pick, extremely overdrafted, did not produce in the way that we wanted, even when Justin Herbert was performing at his optimal level. And the offensive line was as good as it could be before the Joe Alt injury. Ladd McConkey was still, unfortunately, not putting up the numbers that we wanted because through the first 4 weeks of the season, we had a lot of success from Quentin Johnston. I do like Quentin Johnston a lot, actually. I would never draft Quentin Johnston over Ladd McConkey, but I might bypass Ladd McConkey and take the value on Quentin Johnston there. But we've got Quentin Johnston, Keenan Allen. Obviously, we don't know if he's going to be back there or not, but if he's not, we would have Trey Harris to deal with, or perhaps they bring in another receiver. They've got a Rondé Gadsden. They've got, obviously a lot of talent on the ground with Amarian Hampton. So we're feeling this increase in pass volume coming with Mike McDaniel as the offensive coordinator, and we're going to be pushing this offense in a positive direction. I feel super good about Justin Herbert. I feel super good about Ladd McConkey where he's being drafted, but I wouldn't draft him over some of the other guys there. So Ladd, more of an appropriate area there. I feel like if we pushed him all the way up to a wide receiver 10, we would probably be overdrafting him again just because they have so many bodies, unfortunately. But at number 20, I can feel super, super good about it. Let's see here. From Only Morale. Thank you. Says, thank you. Great show. Can't wait to tune in for your next video. And clearly this person is a Commanders fan. Don't mind, I don't blame you. Fandoms, the one thing about me is that unfortunately, because of my fandom being the Green Bay Packers, I can't push my players up draft boards because obviously, there is no justification for pushing any of the Packers into the top 12. So sadly, I can't do that with my fandom there. Maybe we get Christian Watson breakout season. Maybe. But let's jump here to some more comments here. From Linda, well, spicy pick of the day, Garrett Wilson over Chris Olave. If it was anybody at quarterback other than Geno Smith, I'm with you. Like on an apples to apples basis, if they both had the same quarterback, Garrett Wilson or Chris Olave, I love Chris Olave, but I would have to go with Garrett Wilson. We've seen Garrett Wilson be a high volume receiver in destitute situations. Unfortunately, was just the crazy part about it. He even had to go through the Aaron Rodgers situation where Aaron Rodgers was hyper targeting Devontae Adams over him. But he's such a talented receiver. If we could just get him a quarterback in there. But my worry with him, and I don't feel like we talked about Breece Hall a lot in the running backs video, but my worry about the Jets in general, and it's going to be weird because the Jets are also projected to take they're quite often mocked to take a wide receiver in the first, which does make sense. But my fear with the Jets is that they are truly trying to achieve what Vegas achieved last year with Geno Smith. Like, hey, Geno, I seen what you done for the Raiders, and can you do that for us? That's my problem. And I would be a lot higher on Garrett Wilson. Like, I was pretty high on Garrett Wilson last year, probably higher than I should have been. I would be a lot higher on Garrett Wilson if I could trust the quarterback situation. But sadly, I think we're heading for another sad situation. Yeah. And Henry Odom says, why Garrett Wilson over Flowers with Geno as quarterback? Just the better receiver, quite frankly. It's a purely a talent thing of Garrett Wilson. If they add another receiver, I could maybe push it back a little bit. But my problem with Flowers is that, and I'm a little lower on Flowers. Flowers is wide receiver 18 in consensus, and I've got him at wide receiver 21. That, unfortunately, is just a pure lack of trust in Zay Flowers and the overall upside. He has shown levels of consistency, but I just don't feel like he has that ultimate ceiling. And also, when you look at the Ravens, and we're transitioning in this offense as well, I have to believe in my heart of hearts that they are going to add another receiver. Especially because they can't rely on Isaiah likely gone, Mark Andrews, and there's obviously talk of potentially David Njoku joining. But when you look at Mark Andrews and the volume role that he had played in this offense, my problem is that Mark Andrews is probably not someone that they can rely on to have a high volume. And we saw that last season, right? And really kind of the season before. I think he's past the high volume point, unfortunately. They need somebody as an additional pass catcher. I think the ship has sailed on Rashad Bateman. They need somebody to step up and be an additional option in that receiving core. So if they add somebody, as they logically should, that would probably affect Zay Flowers a little bit there. So that one, unfortunately, is just me in not loving the ceiling for Zay Flowers. Like it's funny. I see Only Morale's comment of the Luke McConkey or Lad McConkey and Luke McCaffrey. When you're looking at it, they look like the same name. That is funny. But my only problem there is that, again, that's just I've got higher ceiling optimism for some of these other guys than I do for Zay Flowers, unfortunately. From Cameron Myers, yep, Puka heading to rehab. We talked about that at the beginning of the show here. And arguably you could flip Jamar Chase there. Really JSN as well. But at the end of the day, if Puka's on the field, he is the wide receiver 1 overall. But he is teetering into that, shall we say, Antonio Brown scenario where it's like we're drafting you because we know you've got insane talent, and we know that your volume is incredible, and we know that you put up those ungodly numbers that just break slates. But man, it's getting to a point where I'm starting to wonder if we got to put him in that Rashee Rice category, where, again, when I was talking about Rashee Rice earlier, if Rashee Rice was trustworthy off the field, I would have him a lot higher for sure. Especially since we got enough of a sample size to show that Xavier Worthy is not competition for him. But again, these off the field issues for our guys is just ridiculous at this point. But yeah, let's jump to going through some more of these rankings here real quick. We went through the top 10 there. We talked about Malik Neighbors and how he would move up for me for sure once I get news, as we're kind of in training camp, that he is in fact going to be good week 1. We see him running around. There's no issues there. Just got to be a little bit apprehensive coming off of that injury with him. George Pickens, obviously, this is if he, stays in Dallas and it's a good situation for him. AJ Brown at 13. Obviously, that's going to be in flux. My gut is telling, because we've got all this trade and could they, won't they? He's still a possibility to be a trade candidate on draft day, because you have to imagine, knowing the Eagles, if they were to trade AJ Brown, it would 100% be for, again, it would have to be for immediately drafting a wide receiver 1 in the first round. So if it happens, it's going to be for a first round pick where they can draft a wide receiver to replace him, because I don't see a scenario. Love Devontae Smith, no issue there, but I don't see a scenario where they're walking into the season with Devontae Smith and Hollywood Brown as their wide receiver, 1 and 2 there. They need more of a, bigger bodied wide receiver to replace AJ Brown. So it would have to be, we know for sure we are taking somebody else and we can get a Jordan Tyson, right? Yeah, that would make sense. If they could trade and get a Jordan Tyson, trade away AJ Brown, I could see that making logical sense. But at the same time, a team, are you trading away, the pick there? It's a question mark. So we'll see on AJ Brown. After that, Garrett Wilson, Tedero McMillan at 15 is an interesting one for me. That's kind of where we get into an area where we know Ted is talented. We know he's the wide receiver 1. But we also need for Bryce Young to show a higher level of volume. Granted, he's shown it, right? But we need the team to give him consistently more volume there. After that, Devontae Adams, obviously, We talked about the Puka Nacua situation earlier. Puka Nacua, if this, with the news of him and the news that they were shopping around Devontae Adams, we could very easily get another wide receiver drafted in there. So, especially because, as I mentioned at the top of the draft, the Rams have pick 13. Thank you, Atlanta. So you could very easily get a Mekhi Lemon at that pick, right? Which would be interesting because, hey, yeah, keep it over there, California, right? So I could see that happening. If that were the case, obviously we would significantly adjust Devontae Adams, right? Then we have T. Higgins, just a very safe option there. Jamison Williams, it'll be very interesting to see the level of volume. I trust the level of volume, right? But obviously we've got the change in offensive coordinator there. We talked about Terry McLaurin and Ladd McConkey and Zay Flowers, Luther Burden, Devontae Smith. After that, obviously there would be some adjustments if A.J. Brown were to be traded. And then Emeka Egbuka rounding out there at number 24. Emeka is someone that I am higher on. And this one is interesting. I feel like, so consensus rankings currently have Emeka Egbuka at wide receiver 27. But he has one of the wider gaps. It's weird. There's a lot of, when you look at a player like let's say T. Higgins, right? There's only so much of a gap that you can have. Somebody has him ranked as high as number 12 and as low as number 18. That's not a massive gap because T. Higgins fits into a specific range. Emeka Egbuka's range right now is from wide receiver 19 to wide receiver 31. I tend to lean, and I might, I could push him up a little bit more, honestly, as we kind of see where the draft heads here. Obviously, we would not anticipate. It's possible that Tampa Bay could draft another receiver, but we do have to remember that they do have Jalen McMillan, who they clearly like a lot on roster there. But Emeka Egbuka, the start that he had to that season, I kind of joked about it in another video that it was like the reverse Brian Thomas Jr., where Brian Thomas Jr.'s rookie season ended off with the massive bang. Emeka Egbuka started off at a ridiculous level and then teetered off as the season went on. What we saw at the beginning of the season was just so incredibly encouraging that I want to be positive and target Emeka Egbuka in drafts this season. So 24 is the lowest that I will move him. I can't see me dipping any further down than that. I would love to move him up a little bit higher if we could get just some level of confidence in the off season that this offense is going to move forward with him as a clear wide receiver 1. Because at the beginning of the season, obviously we did not have Godwin, but at this point we're looking at Godwin. He's a little bit older. I think he takes on the clear wide receiver 2 role there. The performances that Emeka put up at the beginning of the season, both in tandem with Mike Evans, and then when Mike Evans also got injured, he showed wide receiver 1 capabilities across the board there. So I feel very positively about him. So that's one that I would like to target as well. Some other guys that I want to point out that are not in the draft rankings here, and I've got my weekly visit from my son here, who I'm not entirely sure why he is joining our show, but we'll see. But some other guys that are not listed in the graphic that I want to, thank you, buddy. Let me work here. Some other guys that are not listed in the graphic that I want to point out here. Apparently he's just going to join us. That's very interesting. That's fine. Mom life. We will continue and move forward here. Okay, he's not here. Quentin Johnston is one that I wanted to point out. I talked about it a little bit with Ladd McConkey. Again, I love the discount that we are getting on both Ladd McConkey and Quentin Johnston. I love Ladd at his ADP. Again, it's, back of top 20 there, very appropriate. We overdrafted him last season. I was responsible for that too. I'm not going to sit there and blame other people. I pushed that ADP up the board for Ladd McConkey with confidence, and I should not have. We're now getting a more appropriate discount for him in 2026. So I love Ladd McConkey, but buddy, you gotta leave me alone. I'm almost done.
Can I listen to music?
Yeah, I'll be done in 15 minutes, and then you can listen to music. Okay. Thank you, buddy.
TV.
Yeah, and I'll help you out. Why don't you find the remote? Go find the remote, and let me finish up this show here, buddy. All right. Thank you for our weekly visit from my son, who had zero purpose for dropping by. But hey, I guess he just wanted to grace you with his presence there. But again, back to Quentin Johnston there. While I love Lad McConkey at his ADP, Quentin Johnston is one that I will be aggressively targeting because right now his consensus ranking is wide receiver. I'll double check because it's wide receiver 45 in my notes, but I don't know if it changed. It changed, and it's wide receiver 46 right now. That is ridiculous. Wide receiver 46 for Quentin Johnston. Crazy, considering that the Chargers had one of the most unfortunate situations last season in the way that their offensive line was demolished, and it made it at times impossible for Justin Herbert to get the ball off and get the ball downfield. The fact that Quentin Johnston was literally wide receiver 25 in average fantasy points per game last season in half PPR. When we had all of that going on, and now he is being drafted as wide receiver 46. That's disrespectful. It should be much higher. ADP should be much higher than that. That's outrageous. That's going to be one that is not on my graphic here that I will be targeting as well. Even if he were to jump up 10 spots or so, I mean, the value there is just absolutely ridiculous when we know that this offense is getting upgraded to Mike McDaniel and will be pushing more pass volume here. So I want to target these Chargers pass catchers, despite the fact that it is a stupidly crowded wide receiver core, especially with Oronde Gadsden in there as well. But at the end of the day, it's Justin Herbert. This offense is going to flow. They're going to be humming. And the discount that we are getting on the ADPs there for our guys, very appropriate there. So I feel very, very good with them. Jumping, shout out in the chat to Scott Jung, 5992. Welcome. Hope you're having a wonderful evening too. And as you know, I got someone in the chat made a comment about the like. I never asked for likes or subscribes during the actual show, but yeah, if you could like the video, that would help out a lot as well. Jumping back to some other guys that are not on the graphic. Oh, and then we need to do tight ends real quick. But jumping back to some guys that are not on the graphic that I will be higher on in rankings as well. Obviously, Jalen Coker is a guy that you guys know. If you follow me, you know I felt all types of ways of positivity and love towards him. Last season, the pain of having him get that high ankle sprain in preseason was so awful, but I feel justified in the way that he came through at the end of the season there, looking like an absolute superstar. It's him and Tedero McMillan. Xavier Legette is not a factor there, so I feel very good about him, and the ADP that we got for him right now, very solid as well. But let's jump to tight ends here real quick. We've talked a ton about the wide receivers here. Let's jump to tight ends here. Tight ends, as we close things out on the show, you know, not a lot of drama at the top, right? Let me go to consensus so we can compare those rankings too. But again, not a lot of drama at the top. Trey McBride at number 1 here. It's Trey McBride. And we have had some rumors, you know, we've had rumors, right, that we could get Ty Simpson to Arizona. Obviously, Dan Orlovsky feels some type of way about Ty Simpson. I don't buy what Dan Orlovsky is selling, but he is the QB2 of the draft here. So it is realistic that we could. Now, at Arizona's pick would be, I sincerely don't think they would do that. I think it would be more of a kind of a Jackson Dart situation where we see a team trade back into the first to get him, because taking him with Arizona's pick, it would just be egregious, right? So as of right now, we would expect that we would have Jacoby Brissett leading the way. Cross our fingers, right? Because Jacoby Brissett and Trey McBride was absolute fantasy fire here. So optimistically, we're crossing our fingers that this is going to happen and that we get a full season of Jacoby Brissett with Trey McBride there. After that, Brock Bowers, we're getting the bounce back here. Fernando Mendoza was looking fantastic in his pro day. You can feel some type of way about him, but he is in fact an upgrade for sure on what they had last season. And we've got the coaching upgrade as well here. So Brock Bowers was Brock Bowers. He battled through an injury. He played through. Remember, he got injured in week 1. He tried to play through it. I wish he had just sat from the get-go because he was clearly hampered there. But Brock Bowers, we know the ceiling that he has here. Colston Loveland at tight end 3. That is also consensus. So my rankings are very close to consensus on tight end. Where I get a little bit off of rankings is once we get to the top 10 and below, right? But consensus is Trey McBride, Brock Bowers, Colston Loveland, Tucker Kraft, Tyler Warren, Harold Fannin Jr. And where I separate there is that I have Kyle Pitts over Sam Laporta. Again, the positivity that we have back to Colston Loveland off of what we saw last season. I do want to be, slightly cautious because obviously when we see those breakout rookie seasons for tight ends, they often come down. No fault of the tight end, no issue there. It's just that we end up sometimes overdrafting a little bit. So I do want to be a little bit apprehensive. But as of right now, I think the ADP is not really a major issue there, so I don't mind it. After that, Tucker Kraft, again, we got to see how he's coming off of that ACL. But quite frankly, when we're looking at the exit of Romeo Doubs, and then we're trying to pinpoint, which one of these Packers wide receivers are going to be the most reliable, it probably is just going to end up being Tucker Kraft there. After that, we've got Tyler Warren. I don't believe we talked about Tyler Warren on this show, but the exit of Michael Pittman is going to be massive, specifically not just like the vote of confidence that obviously the Colts have shown for Alec Pierce being the wide receiver 1. Fantastic. Cool. Love you, Alec Pierce. But at the end of the day, the exit of Michael Pittman is directly helpful for Tyler Warren there. Tyler Warren, he had a fantastic season. Unfortunately, his production went down, obviously, when Daniel Jones went down. But really, the overall issue that capped Tyler Warren's upside was not targets. Targets were fine, right? Let me double check here. It was over 100 targets, but I just want to get the right number for you guys. Tyler Warren had 112 targets. So we had 112 targets, but we only had 4 touchdowns. And that's where the issue lied, is that we only had 4 touchdowns. And the exit of Michael Pittman can solve that issue. Michael Pittman had not been a big touchdown guy for the majority of his career, and that was the fault of obviously all of the destitute quarterbacks that he had. Daniel Jones was such a big positive for Michael Pittman, finally reaching his peak of red zone usage there, because he's a big-bodied receiver, right? And so we had a good amount of red zone targets and touchdowns for him. His exit can open things up directly for Tyler Warren, right? That's a very reasonably perfect replacement as a red zone look specifically. So we get those 100 plus targets, and then we also get 4 more touchdowns, more money, right? So I feel very good about Tyler Warren with Michael Pittman gone. Harold Fannin Jr., obviously, this is one that I think people, and this is consensus, but I feel like, as I've seen people commenting Harold Fannin Jr., it's going to be very interesting with him, because I think people want to be super optimistic based off what we saw last season. And for sure, right? We know for a fact that man is better than Jerry Jeudy, right? So even though we've got the change in offensive philosophy here, right? We've got Kevin Stefanski leaving for Atlanta. We talked about that with Kyle Pitts. Obviously, Kyle Pitts getting a massive upgrade potentially in targets because Kevin Stefanski consistently targeted tight ends at such an aggressive rate. We're going to have a change, obviously, in offensive vision, although Todd Monken, who is now the coach of Cleveland, has no problem with targeting tight ends. Obviously, that was a big part of Baltimore's offense, so it's not an issue there. But the problem is that we've got this offensive shift to a coach who may not have the same aggressive target share that Kevin Stefanski had towards tight ends, but the fact that Cleveland is consistently mocked to get a wide receiver 1. And they could go a wide variety of directions, right? But at the end of the day, I think they know this as well. And especially with their new coach being an offensive guy that came from running offenses in college, he knows that they have to have a new wide receiver 1. And the guys that they have on staff can't be it, right? Obviously, you could lead through Fannin, but that can't be the only target that you consistently have. So drafting a high-end receiver makes a ton of sense for Cleveland, especially considering the fact that they're going to have to work with the quarterbacks that they got, right? So is Deshaun Watson going to make a comeback and finally be the quarterback we saw in Houston? Probably not. Kitchener, Sanders, get development from Todd Monken and really take that leap into being started quarterback. I don't know, right? We don't know. Ain't Dylan Gabriel, right? So, and then they're talking about bringing in competition for Sanders. So there's a wide variety of directions that this could go. And to put their quarterback, whoever their quarterback is, in the best position, they have to have a wide receiver one. So factually, there has to be somebody coming in there stealing targets from Harold Fannin. And Carnell Tate is one that is potentially, obviously, potentially slated to go there. He should be available at that pick, so it'll be interesting. So we just, good area for Fannin, but we just need to kind of pay attention to what Cleveland does in the draft. After that, Kyle Pitts, I talked a ton about him and Kevin Stefanski, but hey, it's good for Kyle Pitts. After that, Sam Laporta. I am very interested in Sam Laporta this season. And I was not last season. I was a fade Sam Laporta, not feeling good about it type of girl. But I'm very interested to see what Drew Petzing brings to this offense, and the fact that he has spent, his time with Trey McBride. It's possible that he brings over some of that love that he had for Trey McBride and pushes it on to Sam Laporta. So if we can see an upgrade significantly in volume to Sam Laporta, that would be fantastic. So that's another one, especially since we're finally getting a nice, we're not having to draft Sam Laporta top 4, tight end 7, 8, even 6, 6, 7, 8, but preferably 7, 8, 9 range would be excellent for Sam Laporta in terms of value. After that, Oronde Gadsden, love him. Again, just a lot of bodies in that Chargers pass catching group. After that, Isaiah Likely. I'm currently a lot higher on Isaiah Likely. I don't know if that's people that not updating their rankings or if I'm just egregious right now. Consensus rankings have Isaiah Likely at tight end 17. I'm not particularly sure I get that one because I know 10 times over I would draft Isaiah Likely over. First of all, you could make the argument for maybe a Travis Kelce just based off pure volume. Again, we saw Xavier Worthy is really not that dude, unfortunately. So you say, okay, at the very least, second look in that offense. So volume should be there, although he has regressed significantly. We can't ignore the fact that Travis Kelce has had a very clear production regression over the past 2 years. And what you can expect from him is probably a max of 800 yards, maybe 5 touchdowns on the high end. So we have to come at it from a realistic perspective, right? But receptions should still be there. But I would draft Isaiah Likely over Juwan Johnson because we are getting another receiver added to New Orleans. So just factually there, it should, in theory, push Juwan Johnson down to the third look. For me, with my tight ends, I need you to be the second look on your offense. You need to be the second look on your offense or be in a high volume, high gunning offense, like a Detroit, perhaps, right? But if you're not, then I'm going to push you further back. So Isaiah Likely over Juwan Johnson just makes too much sense. Travis Kelce, again, argument there. Jake Ferguson. If George Pickens remains, Jake Ferguson, we saw, has a factual capped upside. So we've seen Jake Ferguson with a healthy CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens. He has to be low-end tight end 1 at best, right? Dallas Goedert, fantastic year last year in terms of touchdowns, but unfortunately, if A.J. Brown does stay, again, it's just inconsistent production, and he is unreliable to stay on the field at this point. Dalton Kincaid, we talked about this when we talked about DJ Moore, I believe. It's just, first of all, the Bills, unfortunately, re-signed or extended Dawson Knox. So they will continue to utilize Dawson Knox in some level of capacity there, which ultimately does, do we care about it from our perspective? No, we're not using Dawson Knox, but it does cap that overall upside for Dalton Kincaid. Then you add in DJ Moore. We're just adding in more bodies. No, unfortunately, just the level of volume in passing, just inconsistency there pushes Kincaid back for me. I'm a lot lower on, am I a lot lower? Where is Dalton Kincaid? Yeah, I'm a lot lower on him. Consensus tight end 9 right now for Dalton Kincaid. I just can't get on board with that. I could raise it up maybe a little bit, perhaps over obviously a Dallas Goedert if A.J. Brown does stay, maybe a Jake Ferguson. But of all the tight ends that I've got iffy feelings about, unfortunately, Dalton Kincaid is that guy. I'm not entirely sure why we have that level of confidence in Dalton Kincaid when you consider the fact that it's an optimistic ranking, right? Because we have not seen him perform at a top 10 level, period, right? Like if you were to look at a Sam Laporta and say, okay, Sam Laporta didn't have the year that we wanted last year. but I've got factual proof that Sam Laporta can be a tight end 1 overall. I got no problem with that, right? But when you look at a Dalton Kincaid, to rank him in the same area of a Sam Laporta just seems kind of wild to me because, yeah, talent-wise, for sure, on par, cool. But we have seen back-to-back seasons of Dalton Kincaid, one, not being reliable in terms of staying on the field. So you're in that Dallas Goedert area of reliability in terms of health. But also, you have seen back-to-back seasons of tight end 20 or lower rankings. So I just don't get it. I would love to be proven wrong on that one. Perhaps he has a bounce back season. If there was no DJ Moore, cool. Maybe we could go with it and be optimistic. But we're adding in DJ Moore and we're keeping Dalton Kincaid as a top 10 tight end when we've got guys that are in potential high volume situations. Like, again, Isaiah likely will go down if the Giants were to draft Carnell Tate, which is, they are occasionally mocked to do that. Half of the mocks, well, I think majority of the mocks have them taking a defensive player, but there are some that have them potentially taking Carnell Tate. And if they did that, obviously that would push Isaiah likely further back. But I am operating off the assumption that I don't think that is the landing spot for them and that they will add a wide receiver 2, or they roll with Darnell Mooney, but they will add a wide receiver 2 on day 2 and not mess around with trying to waste your overall when you could really stack up on defensive talent there with that pick that they have for sure. We'll see. But assuming there is not the addition of Carnell Tate to that offense, Isaiah likely would potentially be, especially with his coach, right? His coach that he was just with, the second look in this offense here. So that is why I'm so much higher on him and so much lower on Dalton Kincaid. It's like a reverse switch situation. The optimism, especially when you consider that now perhaps some of that is thinking that Theo Johnson is going to maintain a role there. But you do have to remember that, yes, Jackson Dart did show favoritism towards Theo Johnson. Jackson Dart doesn't make the decisions on who's going to be on the field. We're talking about John Harbaugh bringing in his guy from Baltimore. So we got to roll with that. It's going to be the tight end 1. And we saw that Jackson Dart has zero problem leaning on a tight end. So it should be a good mesh there. But again, jumping to the back half of this, after Dalton Kincaid, we've got Brent Strange. Again, nice, safe pick, but way too many bodies there in Jacksonville, unfortunately. Dalton Schultz. It's interesting. I've seen some mocks of Houston taking a tight end, and this is a very interesting tight end draft. There's guys, right? Obviously, Kenyon Sadiq is mocked anywhere from going as high as like pick 14 to as low as like pick 30. So there's a wide range there for him. But then you've got Eli Stowers and you've got some other talented options at tight end here. So I would not be shocked if Houston took a tight end. I am raising up Kenyon Sadiq to tight end 18 right now. We'll see what the landing spot is. But again, him and Eli Stowers, depending on landing spot, could potentially shoot up in rankings because we have seen consistently year after year that these young rookie tight ends are coming in, making immediate impact. So you don't want to miss out on them, depending on if they're, slated to go to a good quarterback. After that, Hunter Henry, George Kittle, obviously we got to figure out what's going on. I anticipate he will not be ready to start the season. So he will be further back on my draft board here. Chigo Okonkwo, I feel very positively about. I love the potential for him there in Washington. We got to remember Zach Ertz did have a really good amount of targets there in Washington. And if Chig were to get those targets that he did not get in Tennessee, I think he'd capitalize on them and actually give some yards after the catch that Zach Ertz couldn't give because, well, he's a little aged. After that, Pat Freiermuth, who was potentially interesting there with Mike McCarthy. But again, we did have the addition. He would be the third look at best with the addition of Michael Pittman there, so you can't jump too much there. But theoretically, he should be the tight end 1 there and no funny business with Jonnu Smith and whatnot and Arthur Smith making weird choices. So we should at least get Pat Freiermuth as the tight end 1 there. TJ Hawkinson, I feel like a lot of people want to potentially raise him up because obviously, Kyler Murray raising him up there, but it's just a lot of competition there. And Hawk it feels like he's fallen off a wee bit. And then Mark Andrews as a little courtesy ranking there, but I just honestly can't feel good about Mark Andrews in general. Comments here. Let's see. From Lindo Wells. wait a minute, Kenyon Sadiq over George Kittle and Mark Andrews is nasty work. Sadiq is a freak of nature, but we haven't seen him play yet. I know I will know a lot more during preseason. We've seen these rookies come in and make immediate impacts, even when they came into offenses where they theoretically, like if we look at a Colston Loveland situation, Chicago is not a good landing spot in terms of so many bodies to compete with, but he still pushed through in terms of talent. So we've had year after year of the rookies making, Brock Bowers, Sam Laporta, the rookies make this impact. So depending on the landing spot, yeah. But for sure over George Kittle. And George Kittle, the reason for that, guys, is that I would not anticipate George Kittle to be available until like November. So he probably will not be on my draft board. We'll see, right? But knowing the 49ers and Kyle Shanahan, they are very cautious with injuries. They will not rush him back. The Achilles was torn so late. He's obviously like 32. So unfortunately, I just don't see a scenario. There's no way he's ready to start the season. If he were healthy, obviously this would be, George Kittle, top 5 tight end. But I would anticipate it's more like a November kind of time frame return there at best. The way that the 49ers offense operates is they can factually get by without certain players and they do not rush you back. Think about Ricky Pearsall. They're not going to force you to come back. They want you at optimal health there. They retain Jake Tonjes. So, but I also think they're very interesting, a potential target for drafting a tight end because they have to start preparing for their future, right? And maybe they want to move forward with Jake Tonjes. It's just a 1-year retention there for him on his free agency. But maybe this is a prove-it year for him. I think he proved enough, quite frankly, and he could move forward. But Jake Tonjes is the one that will probably creep up there in rankings and be one of my late, at the very least, one of those guys that you bench stash and will probably be a very start-worthy option, weekly top 12 option to begin the season with George Kittle out. So yeah, George Kittle, he unfortunately will, and why tight end 20 is probably a little optimistic. It's more of a courtesy ranking. Will not be on draft boards for you to rely on as a tight end one. Mark Andrews, again, we've had a lot of smoke around the addition of another tight end there. Isaiah likely leaving, maybe that makes you guys feel like, hey, wheels up on Mark Andrews. I think we might be, based off what we've seen of Mark Andrews in back-to-back years here, I worry that we might be at a tipping point for him, unfortunately. So I just don't trust him, even with the exit of Isaiah likely. I can't get there, unfortunately, as relying on him as a tight end one there. They're another team, especially because they lost another tight end as well in free agency. We can't overlook that. It's entirely possible that they are a candidate to draft one of these high-end options. Maybe not as high as a Kenyon Sadiq. That would be a little much, right? But there's a lot of guys that fall after Tanner Koziol, Tanner Koziol was on the mind of somebody that they could draft. There's a lot of guys that fall after Eli Stowers that are very viable options for being starting tight ends at the NFL. So I would not put it past Baltimore to draft a tight end as well, but it sounds like 100% they're adding a tight end. So I would pump brakes and be a little bit cautious on Mark Andrews, unfortunately there. Comment here from Squad. After the top 7, it's a crapshoot for rankings. Yeah, I think, I'll extend it to top 8 because I do like Sam Laporta a lot with Drew Petzing. Again, a little optimism there, but I'm willing to take that risk on him. But after top 8 is where things get shakier because, as I mentioned with Arondé Gadsden, that's where you get into the crowded receiving room. Guys that are going to have additional bodies like, Juwan Johnson. So, yeah, your safe zone there is the cutoff of Sam Laporta. And after that, you start to get a little worrisome there. But I think that nice little mid-range there that we got of Tyler Warren, Harold Fana Jr., Kyle Pitts, Sam Laporta, that's the sweet spot. Top 3 guys for sure, grab them. Trey McBride's ranking, honestly, I think is still mid-second round. So I think it's very reasonable. So, we're targeting McBride and Bowers and Loveland, but the nice sweet spot there is the mid-round guys that are very safe. So those are the ones for sure that I feel like I would be walking out with. And after that, you can take some stabs and try and work around that. That's why Isaiah Likely is so high up, because at the very least, I know he can handle volume. And if they don't add a receiver, I would feel good about him for sure. Let me see one more comment here from that fucking guy. The Geno Wilson connection could be a winner. Geno's best trait is the deep ball over the shoulder. Wilson's elite route running makes him a lethal combination that the Raiders offense lacked. Maybe. And Geno, I don't have faith in Geno, but Wilson is still not a fade for me, for sure. I still think that where do they have him ranked real quick? We can move away from these tight ends, right? 14. I mean, it's a reasonable range. Maybe it's a little aggressive. Let me see where consensus is on him, because I can't remember. Consensus has Wilson at 16. So it's not that far off there. Yeah. I don't think I worry about the Jets offense as a whole, but Garrett Wilson is so talented. I feel like he can push through it. And maybe the Geno connection will work. I don't have a lot of faith in it, but I do have a lot of faith in Garrett Wilson for sure. So it's not a fade for me. I still feel good about him right there for sure. But I think I got to all the comments there. I appreciate you all tuning in. This was a really good chat here. Thank you for all of your comments. Again, let me get back here full screen there and put on my little banner. Again, this is the Dear Miss Fantasy show with me, your host, Tara Roberts. It is available on all podcast platforms. So if you could subscribe, that would be amazing. And I always appreciate a subscription for my YouTube channel, and then also support to Player Profiler as well, who this show is through and who we love. But if you guys have any other questions, feel free to drop them in the comments of any of my videos. It's off season. I got a lot of time, right? So I can reply. and if you ever have any requests of topics, I'm wide open, right? If you have any requests of things that you want to talk about, questions that you have, things that you would like to cover, things you want to chat about, just drop a comment and let me know. But I appreciate you all tuning in. Obviously, I got to go ask my child why he came in here and thought it was appropriate to full on climb and sit behind me during a live show there. He's 6 years old. Perhaps that was his April Fool's secondary prank. They pranked, well, by the way, before I close things out, the way that they pranked me, so I have two kids, two boys, 9 and 6. They got off the bus and pranked me, said that my son, the oldest one, the 9-year-old, got in trouble at school for punching a child in the face. And they had me convinced. They really did. I'm like, that's a little out of character, right? I don't think you would do that, but they had me convinced. For sure. They played a severe April Fool's on me. So perhaps him coming and jumping in the frame was the continuation of that, as he just April Fool's my entire day there. Yeah, but yes, appreciate you all tuning in. Thank you so much. I will talk to you again, as always, next week at 8 p.m. EST. Maybe we talk a little bit more about rookies. Any other rankings you got, because we are rolling up on the draft. We were so close. So lock in, people. I will talk to you all later. Appreciate your support.